Molo Sanbonani, hello, how's it? And shalom, Goeienaand, and welcome to another episode of the Big Daddy Liberty Show. I'm here in Sandton, amongst the wealthy and the elite. I can just feel the money dripping from these buildings, and I'm here for a reason. You know, behind me in those buildings over there are the most elite of the elite in South Africa, both from, or rather not both, but from the big trio, as I like to call them. That's the political elites, you know, big government in particular, big business in this country made up of massive corporations and the formal sector in particular, and of course big labor, the big labor union. The labor bosses are in that building right now, the Sandton Convention Centre, blah, blah, blahing basically their way through how we can bring investment into this country. Now, I call it a blah, blah, blah session because that's exactly what it's been historically. We've always seen these wonderful big conferences held at very fancy venues in, you know, sort of well-to-do parts of South Africa. And the very people who are not part of the conversations in there are, you know, your ordinary South African, that faith, flag, family, and freedom type South African, the God-fearing, law-abiding, and family-orientated South African. They're not in that building right now. They're not part of the conversations in there. They're not part of a resolutions that will be made in that building. Yet, all conversations in there directly impact on the quality of life of South Africans, the ordinary people in this country. So I'm here as a reminder to the elites in this country that if you're going to have these conversations, do not have these conversations without the ordinary people in this country. So you might be wondering, what exactly are they talking about in there? Well, it's probably going to be the usual conversations around, yes, the politicians will tell us, we need to bring investment. You in the corporate sector, in big business, need to invest more. And you in labor need to protect the rights of workers. But now, the problem with that paradigm, which is the status quo right now, is that it is rendered ineffective by two things. Number one, the ideology in this country. It's rendered ineffective by the ideology in this country. What is that ideology? Well, you've heard me talk about it quite a lot on the show. It's mostly a center-left to extreme left ideology that characterizes the politics of South Africa. The politicians in there, the political elites in there, are all lefties. It has been leftist policy in this country which has literally defined the economy, strangled the economy, if I'm to be precise, and it is that same ideology that is being purveyed in that building behind me. So that lack of intellectual diversity means, in my book, and you've heard me say this on the show before, that there will be no real solutions that come out of that building from the people in it, whether they're from big business, big labor, or big government with the political elites. It is unless you have that change in ideology, then you won't see any improvements. What are these ideas then? What are the ideas that we're hearing in there? Well, it's obviously the sort of ideas that we've been hearing from politicians already. Things like expropriation without compensation, things like prescribed assets, the idea that politicians should be able to confiscate your pension in order to fund ESCOM, SAA, and any of these other vanity projects. Those are the ideas that are happening in there. What are some of the other ideas? The other ideas can include things like more regulation in a particular space or a particular sector. Again, killing the entrepreneurial spirit, killing small business. Now, you might be wondering, well, hang on, big business is in that building. Why would they advocate for more regulation in one way or the other? Well, big business, as you all know, loves regulation. Why? Because they can afford to absorb the cost of said regulation, whereas a small business can't. So these ideas, and I'm going to unpack them in a little bit more detail, would effectively mean, again, that none of the solutions you'll hear in there will address the economy. The ideas that you're going to hear in that building behind you are the sort of ideas which I must reiterate, and I'm sorry if I sound repetitive, but some people don't get it, and that's why I repeat myself quite often. You're going to hear conversations about expropriation without compensation, the idea that the state and politicians in particular should have the freedom, the right to take your property rights, to take land away from ordinary South Africans in order for them to decide where that land goes. We're already having those conversations. You're already seeing it on a policy level with the expropriation bill currently before parliamentarians. It is currently before parliamentarians. So what I'm talking about is not some faraway, distant threat. It's here already. You're going to hear conversations in there around prescribed assets as the South African government loses money and doesn't have sources of funding anymore because of their poor governance. They're going to be looking towards your pensions in order to prop up and fund, as I mentioned earlier on, the likes of Eskom, SAA, and any of these other state-owned enterprises that are running up massive debts. I mean, Eskom's debt alone is sitting at a cumulative 400 billion rand. They're going to talk about the national health insurance, especially in this climate of the lockdown, which is meant to address COVID-19. They're going to have that conversation in there. And the politicians, I can tell you now, are going to be begging big business, begging the elites to fund things like the national health insurance. A national health insurance, which effectively is the nationalization of healthcare in this country. It's the idea that your health savings, whether they are in a medical aid, a medical savings account, or whatever the case may be, will be confiscated by politicians in order for it to sit in a big pot called the National Health Insurance Fund. Now, if you don't see the problem with these ideas, if you don't see the connection with these ideas, the idea that it is politicians assuming more control, assuming more power, and essentially stealing from you in order to prop up their projects, if you don't see the problem in that, then really there's nothing more I can say to help you. But it is the problem, or rather that problem is exemplified in what's happening behind me there. It is those ideas, that jerk circle, as I like to call it and joke about it, of ideas that is in that building with the political elites, the effective big business, and big labor. So my being here today, I've got a little sign that I'm going to hold up just now, which will probably get me chased out of here, but we'll see what happens. Stay tuned to the Big Daddy Liberty Show in that regard. My sign out here is to remind them that no, we don't consent to these bad ideas, that these bad ideas do not create a property-owning, prosperous, free, and non-racial society, and that there actually are ideas that they can put in place that can guarantee that future for that God-fearing, law-abiding, and family-orientated South African I talk about. And after this short message, I'll begin to look at what some of those ideas are, and then open my sign up and protest outside the SA Investment Conference. A reminder to these politicians as they sit in that building behind me, blah, blah, blahing away with their friends in big business, with their friends in big labor, that their toxic ideas, including this one, land expropriation and expropriation generally is theft. Socialism is cancer. The ideas in there are toxic. So join me as we show them this message in that well-to-do building behind me. There we go, guys. Expropriation is theft. There we go. A reminder to the elites in that building that land expropriation, any form of eroding of property rights, is pure theft. That is a reminder to you, the elites in that building right now, making decisions about ordinary South Africans, that your ideas are toxic. The rabble of lefties in that building are toxic. We, the ordinary South Africans, are aware of you. We see you, and we will call you out. It will not be business as usual. So a reminder to you that expropriation is theft. Hello, police officers. Remember, expropriation is theft. Hey, man. A reminder to you elites in your nice flashy vehicles, it is not business as usual. We, those who stand for liberty in this country, will fight and resist you with your bad ideas. How's it, guys? Expropriation is theft. Hey guys, expropriation is theft. Yep. You can call it crazy, but expropriation is theft. Hey man. Sorry?
I just asked.
No problem.
I just saw.
Thank you for asking, sir. So we are in here right now. All of society's most elite people, the richest of the rich, the political elites are in this building making decisions about us, ordinary citizens, yet the poor are not represented in there. The ordinary citizen is not represented in there. And they are calling for investment in South Africa, which yes, we want, but the question is,
you are alone.
and that's fine. I can be alone, but I do represent a lot of South Africans who believe that actually power and resources should be in our hands and not their hands. Thanks for asking, man.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks a lot. Expropriation is theft. A nice reminder to the elites, as you sit in there talking about investment, that investment must benefit ordinary people, not you, not your friends, not your BEE partners. Enough of the toxic ideas that are destroying the quality of life of South Africans. More investment, yes. Less political elites, yes. Hey! So there you have it. I think I've set out for you what the problems are, but let's have that conversation of what sort of policy reforms and what sort of ideas, what sort of liberty-leaning ideas are actually required if we're going to get the South African economy to rise, grow, and suck in as many South Africans, especially poor South Africans, as possible. There is a basket of ideas, as I like to call them on this show, liberty-leaning ideas that can achieve that. And those liberty-leaning ideas stand directly opposed to the gaggle of leftist ideas, whether they're statist, socialist, or communist, that are happening in that building right now, where those toxic ideas, those bad ideas are supported, are clapped on by the likes of big business who don't challenge politicians in this country, where those toxic ideas are clapped on, are goaded on by the union bosses, big labor, who do not challenge the status quo because they're part of the status quo ideologically. So what do I propose? What needs to happen in that building? The top 5 big daddy liberty interventions that will get the economy growing, get people into jobs, and help people make an income. From that income, build savings. From those savings, actually acquire wealth and transfer it to the people they care about, families. Number 1, you need actual reform in this country. Things like expropriation without compensation, things that are a threat to the property rights of the poorest individual right up to the richest, have to be off the table completely. They have to be scrapped completely. It cannot continue. It cannot continue to be a situation that we can have an investment conference where people are talking about confiscating the property of investors, including, by the way, your assets. Because remember, property is defined in the Constitution under Section 25 as not just land, but also, the very wallet in my pocket, the phone in your hand that you're watching this from, the money in your wallet is your property. So expropriation without compensation has to be off the table. And we need to secure, therefore, as number 1, property rights in this country. Allow the ordinary person to be able to say, this is mine, I own this. And really, I talk about the individual owning things, but really we're a family society. So allowing families to be able to take a piece of land or a home, a savings account, whatever the case may be, and say, this is mine, this is ours, and no politician has the right or the ability to confiscate this from me. Securing property rights, number 1. Critically important if you're going to get the investment story right. Sorry, sir, can you just go around me, please? Thank you. Great smile, by the way. You might be on camera. There you go. Hey, don't look away now. Come on now. Show them that pretty face, dog. Number two, having secured property rights, then you need to have a conversation around how do more South Africans, the poverty-stricken South African, that chap who lives on a sand dune in a shack in Cape Town that I often talk about, that young man sitting on a street corner in Mlazi, my township where I'm from, the young guy who's in matric right now, wondering what his future holds, his or her future holds for them. How do you guarantee that person earning an income, from that income building savings, from those savings building wealth? How do we create a society where it is the citizens of the country who are wealthy and not the political elites, not the corporates, and not big labor? The only way you can do that is a market economy, a strong, robust, free, and growing market economy for people, ordinary people like you and me, to be given the freedom to trade. If you want to start a small business, by goodness, remove the regulations, remove the red tape that makes it difficult for the entrepreneur to start something. If you want to find work, employment, and you're unskilled, and the greatest barrier right now to unskilled people is things like minimum wages and regulations that set a bar, an unattainable bar for the vast majority of unskilled people in this country. Remove that bar. remove the regulations, remove the red tape, remove the minimum wage. Allow the individual to approach an employer, and to strike a deal up between the two of them, a contract between the two of them. Yes, to you and me, what that person might be earning might not seem like a lot, but it is that first foot into employment, that first foot into a job, which allows them to be able to grow skills on the job, number one, and two, earn an income which can allow them to reproduce their labor. If you can get government out of the way of that, what should be a relationship between an employee and an employer, making it easier for an employer, someone who's an entrepreneur, to hire and fire people, you'll create millions and you unleash the value that is found in the South African economy that is languishing at the moment. So definitely removing red tape, loosening labor laws to make it easier for people to hire and fire, and of course, protecting the direct relationship between someone who's seeking work and someone who's looking to provide work. Critically important is to, in that regard, get the labor market right and introduce a free and robust market economy that creates wealth, creates jobs, and sucks in poor people. Number three, critically important once again. So many of these are critically important, but number three, you've got to start silencing the more radical leftist voices in this country. There will be no South Africa if we continue on the pathway of radical leftist ideology and ideas. So things like a national health insurance, things like expropriation without compensation, basically policies that appropriate more power and resources into the hands of politicians have to be off the table. And what you want to start seeing more of are policies that invite the individual, invite the citizen, invite families to be the ones that generate income, generate activity, and generate economic wealth. So to this regard, I would like to see, therefore, a shrinking of the size of government. The government cannot continue to be as large and as debt-ridden as it continues to be. We need to start shrinking the size of government and placing more of those resources and the power into the hands of individuals and families. The best way to do that is in very practical ways. For example, and these are the ideas that I take with me into communities when I do this advocacy work, on education. There is no reason for the Department of Education in this country to run schools, to also fund schools. Instead, you can take the exact budget of the Department of Education, break it up into vouchers, and give it to poor parents for them to decide where they spend that money on in getting an education for their kids. I mean, we've seen some calculations that range between 18,000 Rand to 20,000 Rand per parent, depending on how you do the calculations, of course, as a voucher that can be given to each parent for each child. Imagine what a poor parent can do if you gave them a voucher of 20,000 Rand for them to dispense on the education of their child. That parent would immediately seek the best available opportunity for their children to get an education, because you've empowered the individual, the parent, the citizen, if you will, and not the government official who makes the decisions, and not politicians making the decisions. Simple ideas like that, which are liberty-leaning ideas. So once you've empowered the parent, which addresses demand, the supply side is equally as easy, where government does not control schools, should not run schools. Government can then sell schools for as little as 1 Rand to various NGOs, the private sector, even religious institutions, for those institutions to run and manage schools and attract parents by the quality of education. These parents, by the way, who you've empowered with a 20,000 Rand education voucher. And again, that 20,000 Rand is a figure which is not cast in stone. You'd have to do the proper accounting to figure out how much the value of that voucher would be, but it would be substantial nonetheless. Again, these are the sort of ideas I would love to be discussed in there. Ideas that relinquish power from politicians and the elites and puts it into the hands of ordinary citizens. On healthcare, you can do exactly the same. Instead of having a national health insurance, break up the Department of Health's budget and put it into the hands of people, ordinary citizens, people who are walking by like this couple over here, for them to decide where they get their healthcare services from, allowing them to buy their own medical aid and to access quality private healthcare, which right now is the sole preserve of middle class and elites. How about we actually extend that same, if you want to call it a right, to poor people too? Again, these are the ideas I would want to hear from inside there. The penultimate, of course, then is And it really ties everything together. Once you've eliminated the bad ideas, you have eliminated ideas such as expropriation without compensation, BEE, which is a toxic policy that creates no value, but rather creates a small elite. Ironically, that same elite is in there, making decisions. You eliminate a national health insurance, which is a policy that nationalizes health and creates an ESCOM of healthcare. You eliminate policies such as prescribed assets, which is complete theft. It's pure theft. It's the idea of politicians taking your pension in order for them to decide where your money goes and is funded. Obviously things like ESCOM and SAA. Once you eliminate those bad ideas and you reduce the size and the influence of both government, politicians and the elites, and rather you transfer that power, you transfer those resources into the hands of ordinary citizens, the one thing that ties it all together in my view, that preserves and protects that faith, flag, family and freedom type South Africa is safe communities and a safe environment. You cannot have prosperity in an environment of high crime, corruption and the like. You need to have a criminal justice system in this country which is able to respond to crime, which is able to respond to the corruption and place crooks and criminals behind bars, which is where they belong. You need safe streets in this country so that families, once they're empowered, of course, to be the sort of people who are able to find work, in order to get to work and get home, you need to do that in a safe environment. You can't be coming home to, as things are, unsafe townships, unsafe informal settlements, where residents get home and then lock themselves behind Fort Knox. That cannot continue. Safety and security is a critical responsibility of the state, and it's one which requires absolute reform. And there's hard ideas around how you can do that. First is accountability. Let communities, let ordinary communities have a direct relationship with their local police station by electing their local station commander. You can do that during the time of local government elections. You can do that maybe even by a CPF being the one that does the electing, but a direct accountable relationship between communities and their local policing management and leadership, so that police stations are then well-resourced, well-run by people who know what they're doing and people who are obviously accountable to the communities that they serve. That's one area. Number two, leveraging the power of the private sector, which has done a much more sterling job in this country of addressing safety and security and providing visible policing. Instead of shutting down private security firms or constricting them, give them greater powers to be able to work with communities, to work with especially community watches, community patrols, so that you can have more visible policing in an area, especially as you do the work of getting SAPs up back to a professional standard. The last one, of course, is a well-funded justice system, so that cases are done really well, put together really well, sent to the National Prosecuting Authority, which is impartial and should not be controlled by politicians, and that those cases are prosecuted and criminals end up behind bars. There are ideas, guys, on how we can do this. I've gave you 5 key reforms that I would want to see. The 5 conversations, really, the 5 key areas that if I was in that building, would want the people to discuss as we look to bring investment into South Africa. If you don't have any of these 5 areas, if there is no concerted effort towards reform in this direction, of a liberty direction, then that is more blah, 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 and a useless gaggle of lefties who are either in big business, big labor, or big government. That's my 2 cents on this, guys. Hope you enjoyed this episode. Remember, you can continue the work of supporting your favorite fat boy, the street fighter, quite literally, for liberty ideas and freedom ideas by supporting my work. It's quite simple. All the information is in the descriptor of this video. You can support me via PayPal, Patreon, or just a contribution to the bank account that I've now made available. And thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed my little moment of me protesting here. Yeah. And with that being said, and perhaps as a theme of this little video, never trust a commie.